A final issue raised by the committee's investigation of intelligence production is whether the new organizational structure proposed by the President will assure the appropriate stature for the Directorate of Intelligence to help overcome existing problems in the production of finished intelligence. Instead of reporting directly to the DCI, who is still to be the President's Chief Intelligence Advisor, CIA analysts may well report through the Deputy for the CIA. Experience indicates that the new deputy will need to devote the bulk of his time to managing the clandestine services and the Directorate for Science and Technology. At the same time, the DCI may be preoccupied with greater community-wide management responsibilities. Without some further restructuring, the committee believes that the production of finished intelligence may be lost in the shuffle. Recommendations. 29. By statute, the Director of the Directorate of Intelligence, DDI, should be authorized to continue to report directly to the Director of Central Intelligence. 30. The committee recommends that a system be devised to ensure that intelligence analysts are better and more promptly informed about United States policies and programs affecting their respective areas of responsibility. 31. The Central Intelligence Agency and the Intelligence Oversight Committees or Committee of Congress should re-examine the personnel system of the Directorate of Intelligence with a view to providing a more flexible, less hierarchical personnel system. Supergrade positions should be available on the basis of an individual's analytical capabilities. 32. The Directorate for Intelligence should seek to bring more established analysts into the CIA at middle and upper grade levels for both career positions and temporary assignments. 33. Greater emphasis should be placed on stimulating development of new tools and methods of analysis. 34. Agency policy should continue to encourage intelligence analysts to assume substantive tours of duty on an open basis in other agencies, state, defense, NSC staff, or in academic institutions to broaden both their analytical outlook and their appreciation for the relevance of their analysis to policymakers and operators within the government. End of page 444, beginning page 445. Subsection 3. Covert action and paramilitary operations. Covert action is the attempt to influence the internal affairs of other nations in support of the United States foreign policy in a manner that conceals the participation of the United States government. Covert action includes political and economic action, propaganda, and paramilitary activities. The basic unit of covert action is the project. Covert action, quote, projects, and quote, can range from single assets, such as a journalist placing propaganda, through a network of assets working in the media, to major covert and military intervention, such as in Laos. The agency also maintains what it terms as an, quote, operational infrastructure, end quote, of, quote, standby, end quote, assets, agents of influence or media assets, who can be used in major operations, such as in Chile. These, quote, standby, end quote, assets are also part of ongoing, most often routine projects. There are no There are no inactive assets. Covert action. The committee has found that the CIA has conducted some 900 major or sensitive covert action projects, plus several thousand smaller projects since 1961. The need to maintain secrecy shields covert action projects from the rigorous public scrutiny and debate necessary to determine their capability with established American foreign policy goals. Recently, a large-scale covert paramilitary operation in Angola was initiated without any effort on the part of the executive branch to articulate and win public support for its overall policy in Africa. Only public disclosure has allowed the nation to apply its standards of success or failure to covert action projects, and then only in retrospect, often without the benefit of details prompting the original choice of covert rather than overt action. The secrecy covert action requires means that the public cannot determine whether such actions are consistent with established foreign policy goals. This secrecy also has allowed covert action to take place which are inconsistent with our basic traditions and values. Some covert operations have passed retrospective public judgments, such as the support given to Western Europe democratic parties facing strong communist opposition in the late 1940s and 1950s. Others have not. In the view of the committee, the covert harassment of democratically elected government of Salvador Allende in Chile did not command U.S. public approval. Even if the short-term consequences of covert action are consistent with stated policies and accepted standards, the committee has found that the continued use of covert action techniques within or against a foreign society can have unintended consequences that sometimes subvert long-term goals. For instance, extended covert support to foreign political leaders, parties, labor unions, or the media has not always accomplished the intended objective of strengthening them against the communist challenge. In some cases, it has both emerged a debilitating dependence on U.S. covert support and made those receiving such support vulnerable to repudiation in their own society when their covert ties are exposed. Furthermore, prolonged covert relations and the resulting dependence of recipients on continued. End of page 445, beginning page 446. CIA support seemed to encourage the CIA to extend its ties to means of controlling the recipients and other aspects. Covert actions also have, over time, developed a bureaucratic momentum of their own that often surpasses the original need for covert action. Paramilitary operations. Covert paramilitary operations are a special, extreme form of covert action. These operations most often consist of covert military assistance and training, but occasionally have involved actual combat activities by American advisors. Because military assistance involves foreign policy commitments, it is, with one exception, authorized by the Congress. That exception is covert military assistance, which is channeled through the CIA without being authorized or approved by the Congress as a whole. Covert U.S. paramilitary combat operations frequently amount to making war, but they do not come under the War Powers Act since they usually do not involve uniformed U.S. military officers. American military officers engaged in CIA-sponsored paramilitary operations are, quote, sheep-dipped, end quote, for paramilitary duty. That is, they appear to resign from the military, yet preserve their place for reactivation once their tour as civilian in paramilitary operations has ended. The committee finds that major paramilitary operations have often failed to achieve their intended objective. Most have eventually been exposed. Operations as in Angola, recently, and Indonesia in the late 1950s are examples of such paramilitary failures. Others, such as Laos, are judged successes by the CIA and officials within the executive branch. The, quote, success, unquote, in Laos, however, must be seen against the larger American involvement in Indochina, which failed. Paramilitary operations often have evolved into large-scale programs with a high risk of exposure, and thus embarrassment and/or failure. In some cases, the CIA has been used to undertake paramilitary operations simply because the agency is less accountable to the public for highly visible, quote, secret, end quote, military operations. In all cases considered by the committee, command and control within the executive branch. I'll read that again. In all cases considered by the committee, command and control within the executive branch was rigorous. However, all such operations have been conducted without direct congressional authority or public debate. In recent years, some have been continued in the face of strong congressional disapproval. Recently, however, apart from Angola, United States paramilitary activities have been at a very low profile. The capability for these actions residing jointly in the CIA and the Department of Defense consists of a cadre of trained officers, stockpiles of military equipment, logistic networks, and small collections of air and maritime assets. Review and approval of covert action. Given the open and democratic assumptions on which our government is based, the committee has given serious consideration to the option of proposing a total ban on all forms of covert activity. The committee has concluded, however, that the United States should maintain the capability to react through covert action when no other means will suffice to meet extraordinary circumstances involving grave. End of page 446, beginning page 447. Threats to U.S. national security. Nevertheless, covert action should be considered as an exception to the normal process of government action abroad, rather than a parallel but invisible system in which covert operations are routine. Absent some means of assuring public participation in assessing each covert action, the mechanisms of executive branch review and control of legislative intelligence oversight must serve as the restricted arenas in which such standards are applied to covert action. The committee's examination of covert action record over the last 25 years has underscored the necessity for legislative reinforcement of the executive branch's internal review process. This is necessary to assure that all covert action projects are reviewed and to establish a system of formal accountability within the executive accessible to congressional intelligence oversight bodies. The CIA has not been free, however, to carry out covert action as it sees fit. The committee's investigation revealed that, on the whole, the agency has been responsive to internal and external review and authorization requirements. Most of the significant covert operations have been approved by the appropriate NSC committee. At the same time, the committee notes that approval outside the agency does not solve all problems, since the NSC committees have approved and in some cases indicated projects that involved highly improper practices or were inconsistent with declared foreign policies. Approximately 3/4 of all covert action projects are never reviewed or approved by a high-level body outside the CIA. Footnote 28. Pausing the reading to read footnote 28. Since 1974, the President has had to certify all covert actions as important to the national security, treating smaller projects by certain broad categories. Resuming the reading. These projects, which are not brought before the NSC for review, are so-called, quote, non-sensitive, end quote, projects, or part of what the CIA calls its, quote, operational infrastructure, end quote. The committee found that a single small project, though not reviewed by the NSC, still can be of great importance. Example: QJWIN, the CIA, quote, executive action, end quote, assassination capability, and AMLASH, the Cuban officer being groomed to kill Fidel Castro. Moreover, a cluster of small projects can be aggravated to form a program of significance. Example: Chile. Until recently, Congress, through its committees, has failed to effectively oversee CIA covert action. Much of this flowed from the legitimate desire of the congressional oversight committees to maintain the security of covert action projects, but it also resulted from a hesitancy to challenge the president or to become directly involved in projects he deemed necessary. Covert paramilitary operations pose a special problem, since they cut across several functions and committee jurisdictions of Congress, namely granting military assistance and making war. Members of the congressional oversight committees are almost totally dependent on the executive branch for information on covert operations. The secrecy needed for these covert operations allows the executive to limit the information provided to the Congress and to use covert actions to avoid the open scrutiny and debate of the normal foreign policy procedures. While the committee believes that the end of page 447, beginning of page 448, executives should continue to have the initiative in forming covert action, it also strongly believes that the appropriate oversight bodies of Congress should be fully informed prior to the initiation of such actions. Congressional power over the purse can serve as the most effective congressional oversight tool if there is the courage and the will to exercise it. In addition to the regular budget for covert action, the agency draws on a contingency reserve fund for unanticipated projects. Any withdrawals from this fund require approval from the Office of Management and Budget and notification within 48 hours to the appropriate congressional committees. The committee believes that the contingency fund can also provide one of the mechanisms by which Congress can effectively control covert action. Recommendations. 35. Legislation establishing the charter for the Central Intelligence Agency should specify that the CIA is the only U.S. government agency authorized to conduct covert actions. The purpose of covert actions should be to deal with grave threats to American security. Covert actions should be consistent with publicly defined United States foreign policy goals and should be reserved for extraordinary circumstances when no other means will suffice. The legislation governing covert action should require executive branch procedures which will ensure careful and thorough consideration of both general policies governing covert action and a particular covert action project, projects. Such procedures should require the participation and accountability of the highest level policymakers. 36. The committee has already recommended, following its investigation of alleged assassination attempts directed at foreign leaders, a statute to forbid such activities. The committee reaffirms its support for such a statute and further recommends prohibiting the following covert activities by statute. All political assassinations. Footnote 29. Efforts to subvert democratic governments. Support for police or other internal security forces which engage in the systematic violation of human rights. Pausing the reading to read footnote 29. The committee endorses Executive Order 11905 of February 1876, which states, quote, "No employee of the United States government shall engage in or conspire to engage in political assassination," end quote. Resuming the reading. 37. By statute, the appropriate NSC committee, example, the Operations Advisory Group, should review every covert action proposal. Footnote 30. Pausing the reading to read footnote 30. Executive Order 11905, February 1876, established the Operations Advisory Group and directed it to, quote, "consider and develop a policy recommendation, including any dissents for the President prior to his decision on each special activity, example, covert operations, in support of national foreign policy objectives," end quote. And resuming the reading. The committee recommends that the Operations Advisory Group review include a careful and systematic analysis of the political premises underlying the recommended actions, as well as the nature, extent, purpose, risks, likelihood of success, and costs of the operation. Reasons explaining why the objective can. End of page 448, beginning page 449. Not be achieved by overt means should also be considered. Each covert action project should be formally considered at a meeting of the OAG and, if approved, forwarded to the President for a final decision. The views and positions of the participants would be fully recorded. For the purpose of OAG, presidential and congressional considerations, all so-called non-sensitive projects should be aggregated according to the extraordinary circumstances or contingency against which the project is directed. 38. By statute, the Intelligence Oversight Committee of Congress should require that the annual budget submission for covert action programs be specified and detailed as to the activity recommended. Unforeseen covert action projects should be funded from the Contingency Reserve Fund, which could be replenished only after the concurrence of the Oversight and any other appropriate congressional committees.
The Congressional Intelligence Oversight Committees should be notified prior to any withdrawal from the Contingency Reserve Fund. 39. By statute, any covert use by the United States government, by the U.S. government of American citizens as combatants should be preceded by the notification required for all covert actions. A statute should provide that within 60 days of such notification, such use be terminated unless the Congress has specifically authorized such use. The Congress should be empowered to terminate such use at any time. Footnote 31. Pausing the reading to read footnote 31. This recommendation parallels the current provisions of the War Powers Resolution, which could be so amended. Appendix C, Hearings, Volume 7, page 226. Resuming the reading. 40. By statute, the executive branch should be prevented from conducting any covert military assistance program, including the indirect or direct provision of military material, military or logistics advice and training, and funds for mercenaries, without the explicit prior consent of the Intelligence Oversight Committee of Congress. Section G. Reorganization of the intelligence community. Subsection 1. The position of the DCI. The committee recommends, regarding the Director of Central Intelligence, pages 43 to 45, would, if implemented, increase his authority over the entire intelligence community. Given such increased authority, the committee believes that both the executive branch and the Intelligence Oversight Committee of Congress should give careful consideration to removing the DCI from direct management responsibility for the Central Intelligence Agency. This would free the DCI to concentrate on his responsibilities with regard to the entire intelligence community and would remove him from any conflict of interest in performing that task. It might also increase the accountability of the Central Intelligence Agency by establishing a new and separate senior position, a director of the Central Intelligence Agency, responsible for only the CIA. Subsection 2. The structures of the CIA. The committee believes that several important problems uncovered in the course of this inquiry suggest that serious consideration also be given to major structural change in the CIA. In particular, separating, end of page 449, beginning page 450, national intelligence production and analysis from the clandestine service and other collection funds. Intelligence production could be placed directly under the DCI, while clandestine collection of foreign intelligence from human and technical sources, and covert operations would remain in the CIA. The advantages of such a step are several. The DCI would be removed from the conflict of interest situation of managing the intelligence community as a whole, while also directing a collection agency. The concern that the DCI's national intelligence judgments are compromised by the impulse to justify certain covert action operations or by close association of the covert action operations or by a close association of the analysts with the clandestine service would be remedied. The problem seen by some in the intelligence community of bias on the part of CIA analysts toward the collection resources of the CIA would be lessened. It would facilitate providing the intelligence production unit with greater priority and increased resources necessary for improving the quality of its finished intelligence. Tighter policy control of the clandestine service by the National Security Council and the Department of State would be possible. The director would be able to focus increased attention on monitoring clandestine services, internal reorganization of the Directorate for Intelligence, and the remainder of the CIA could be facilitated. There are potential drawbacks as well. The Director of Central Intelligence might lose the influence that is part of having command responsibility for the clandestine services. The increasing, though still not extensive, contact between national intelligence analysts and the clandestine service for the purpose of improving the espionage effort might be inhibited. The DCI would have managerial responsibility over the former CIA analysts, which might place him in a conflict of interest situation in regard to the production of intelligence. The increased number of independent agencies would increase the DCI's coordination problems. If the clandestine services did not report to the DCI, there would be the problem of establishing an alternative chain of command to the President. The clandestine service might be downgraded and fail to secure adequate support. Nonetheless, on balance, the committee believes such separation of functions and consequent possible realignments in authority within the intelligence community merit serious consideration. End of page 450. Beginning page 451. Subsection Recommendations 41. The Intelligence Oversight Committees or Committee of Congress, in the course of developing a new charter for the intelligence community, should give consideration to separating the functions of the DCI and the Director of the CIA, and to dividing the intelligence analysis and production functions from the clandestine collection and covert action functions of the present CIA. Section H. Relations with United States institutions and private citizens. In the immediate post-war period, as the communists pressed to influence and control international organizations and movements, mass communications, and cultural institutions, the United States responded by having American private institutions and individuals in the secret struggle over minds, institutions, and ideals. In the process, the CIA subsidized and even helped develop, quote, private, end quote, or non-government organizations that were designed to compete with communists around the world. The CIA supported not only foreign organizations, but also the international activities of United States student, labor, cultural, and philanthropic organizations. These covert relationships have attracted public concern at this committee's attention because of the importance that Americans attach to the independence of these institutions. The committee found that in the past, the scale and diversity of these covert actions has been extensive. For operational purposes, the CIA has funded a special program of a major American business association, collaborated with an American trade union federation, helped to establish a research center at a major United States university, supported an international exchange program sponsored by a group of United States universities, made widespread use of philanthropic organizations to fund such covert action programs. The committee's concern about these relationships is heightened by the agency's tendency to move from support to use of both institutions and individuals. For example, the initial purpose of the agency's funding of the National Student Association was to permit United States students to represent their own ideas in their own way in the international forums of that day. Nevertheless, the committee has found instances in which the CIA moved from general support to the, quote, operational use, end quote, of individual students. Footnote 32. Pausing the reading to read footnote 32. Operational use, according to CIA directives, means performing services in support of the CIA Operations Directorate and may include the recruitment, utilization, or training of any individual for such purposes, as providing cover and collecting intelligence. Resuming the reading. Contrary to the public's understanding, over 250 United States students were sponsored by the CIA to attend youth festivals in Moscow, Vienna, and Helsinki. And end of page 451, beginning page 452. Used for missions such as reporting on Soviet and Third World personalities or observing Soviet security practices. The CIA also used National Student Association Summer International Seminars in the United States in the 1950s and 1960s to identify and screen new leaders whom they would eventually support at the National NSA Convention. When the CIA's relationship to NSA was publicly revealed in 1967, the Johnson administration established the Katzenbach Committee with a limited mandate to investigate the relationship of the CIA to, quote, U.S. educational and private voluntary organizations which operate abroad, end quote. The Katzenbach Committee recommended that it should be the policy of the United States government not to provide any, quote, covert financial assistance or support, direct or indirect, to any of the nation's educational or private voluntary institutions, end quote. The committee found that the CIA not only carried out this Katzenbach recommendation, but also terminated support for a number of other U.S.-based organizations, such as publishing houses. Nevertheless, the CIA, with the approval of the appropriate NSC committee, ensured the continuation of a number of high-priority operations by either moving them overseas or encouraging private and non-CIA government support of domestically based operations. More importantly, however, the CIA shifted its operational interest from institutional relationships to individuals in or affiliated with private institutions. The committee inquiry has been particularly concerned about the current operational use of United States citizens as individuals. Some academics now help the CIA by providing leads and, on occasion, making introductions to potential sources of foreign intelligence. American academics and freelance writers are occasionally used abroad to assist the CIA's clandestine mission. Subsection 1. Covert use of the U.S. academic community. The Central Intelligence Agency is now using several hundred American academics, footnote 33, who in addition to providing leads and sometimes making introductions for intelligence purposes, occasionally write books and other materials to be used for propaganda purposes abroad. Beyond these, an additional few more are used in an unwitting manner for minor activities. Pausing the reading to read footnote 33. Quote, academics, end quote, includes administrators, faculty members, and graduate students engaged in teaching. Resuming the reading. These academics are located in over 100 American colleges, universities, and related institutes. At the majority of institutions, no one other than the individual academic concerned is aware of the CIA link. At the others, at least one university official is aware of the operational use made of academics on his campus. In addition, there are several American academics abroad who serve operational purposes, primarily the collection of intelligence. The CIA gives a high priority to obtaining leads on potential foreign intelligence sources, especially those from communist countries. This agency's emphasis reflects the fact that many foreign nationals in the United States are in this category. The committee notes that American academics provide valuable assistance in this activity. Footnote 33A. Pausing the reading to read footnote 33A. For explanation of italics, see footnote, page 79. End of page 452, beginning page 453. The committee is concerned, however, that American academics involved in such activities may undermine public confidence, and that those who train our youth are upholding the ideals, independence, and integrity of American universities. Subsection Government Grantees. CIA regulations adopted in 1967 prohibit the, quote, operational, end quote, use of certain narrow categories of individuals. The CIA is prohibited from using teachers, lecturers, and students receiving grants from the Board of Foreign Fellowship under the Fulbright-Hays Act. Footnote 34. Pausing the reading to read footnote 34. CIA regulations also prohibit the use of members of Action, ACTION, and officials, employees, and grantees of the Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie Foundations. Resuming the reading. There is no prohibition on the use of individuals participating in any other federally funded exchange programs. For example, in the CIA may use those grantees, artists, specialists, athletes, leaders, etc., who do not receive their grants from the Board of Foreign Scholarships. The committee is concerned that there is no prohibition against exploiting such open federal programs for clandestine purposes. Footnote 35. Pausing the reading to read footnote 35. For explanation of italics, see footnote, page 79. Resuming the reading. Subsection 2. The covert use of books and publishing houses. The committee has found that the Central Intelligence Agency attaches a particular importance to book publishing activities as a form of covert propaganda. A former officer in the clandestine service stated that books are, quote, the most important weapon of strategic, long-range propaganda, end quote. Prior to 1967, the Central Intelligence Agency sponsored, subsidized, or produced over 1,000 books, approximately 25% of them in English. In 1967 alone, the CIA published or subsidized over 200 books, ranging from books on African safaris and wildlife to translations of Machiavelli's The Prince into Swahili and works of T.S. Eliot into Russian, to a competitor to Mao's Little Red Book, which was entitled Quotations from Chairman Liu. The committee found that an important number of books actually produced by the Central Intelligence Agency were reviewed and marketed in the United States. A book about a young student from a developing country who had studied in a communist country was described by the CIA as, quote, developed by, in brackets, 2 areas division, end brackets, and produced by the Domestic Operations Division, and has had a high impact in the United States, as well as in the, quote, in brackets, foreign area, in brackets, market, end quote. This book, which was produced by the European outlet of a United States publishing house, was published in condensed form in 2 major U.S. magazines. Footnote 36. Pausing the reading to read footnote 36. CBS commentator Eric Sevareid, in reviewing this book, spoke a larger truth than he knew when he suggested that, quote, our propaganda services could do worse than flood, in brackets, foreign, end brackets, university towns with this volume, end quote. Resuming the reading. Another CIA book, the Penkovsky Papers, was published in the United States in 1965. The book was prepared and written by witting agency assets who drew on actual case materials and publication rights to the manuscript. End of page 453, beginning page 454. Were sold to the publisher through a trust fund which was established for the purpose. The publisher was unaware of any U.S. government interest. In 1967, the CIA stopped publishing within the United States. Since then, the agency has published some 250 books abroad, most of them in foreign languages. The CIA has given special attention to publication and circulation abroad of books about conditions in the Soviet bloc. Of those targeted at audiences outside the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, a large number has also been available in English. Subsection 3. Domestic, quote, fallout, end quote. The committee finds that covert media operations can result in manipulating or incidentally misleading the American public. Despite efforts to minimize it, CIA employees, past and present, have conceded that there is no way to shield the American public completely from, quote, fallout, end quote, in the United States, from agency propaganda or placements overseas. Indeed, following the Katzenbach inquiry, the Deputy Director for Operations issued a directive stating, quote, fallout in the United States from a foreign publication which we support is inevitable and consequently permissible, end quote. The domestic fallout of covert propaganda comes from many sources. Books intended primarily for an English-speaking foreign audience, CIA press placements that are picked up by an international wire service, and publications resulting from direct CIA funding of foreign institutes. For example, a book written for an English-speaking foreign audience by one CIA operative was reviewed favorably by another CIA agent in the New York Times. The committee also found that the CIA helped create and support various Vietnamese periodicals and publications. In at least one instance, a CIA-supported Vietnamese publication was used to propagandize the American public and the members and staff of both houses of Congress. So effective was this propaganda that some members quoted from the publication in debating the controversial question of the United States involvement in Vietnam. I'm going to pause the reading briefly just to note that in the last bit of one of these sentences in this paragraph, where it mentions that a book written for an English-speaking foreign audience by a CIA operative, which was reviewed by a CIA agent in the New York Times, where it says New York Times, it begins, the text begins to be in italics. Why is it in italics? I do not know, but the footnotes explains, as it does here also in footnote 38. For explanation of italics, see footnote page 179. So that would have to be reviewed. I'm just noting that for myself and the audience. So, resuming the reading. The committee found that this inevitable domestic fallout was compounded when the agency circulated its subsidized books in the United States prior to their distribution abroad in order to induce a favorable reception overseas. I'm going to pause the reading right there and just say that there was other parts of this text that were in italics, so if interested, go back and look and then do your research. So, resuming the reading. The covert use of U.S. journalists and media institutions on February 11, 1976. CIA Director George Bush announced new guidelines governing the agency's relationship with United States media organizations. Effective immediately, CIA will not enter into any paid or contractual relationship with any full-time or part-time news correspondent accredited by any U.S. news service, newspaper, periodical, radio or television network or station. Footnote 38. Pausing the reading to read footnote 38. According to the CIA, quote, accredited, end quote, applies to individuals who are, quote, formally authorized by contract or issuance of press credentials to represent themselves as correspondents, end quote. For explanation of italics, see footnote, page 179. End of page 454, beginning page 455. Agency officials who testified after the February 11, 1976 announcement told the committee that the prohibition extends to non-Americans accredited to specific United States media organizations. The CIA currently maintains a network of several hundred foreign individuals around the world who provide intelligence for the CIA and at times attempt to influence opinion through the use of covert propaganda. These individuals provide the CIA with direct access to a large number of newspapers and periodicals, scores of press services and news agencies, radio and television stations, commercial book publishers, and other foreign media outlets. Approximately 50 of the assets are individual American journalists or employees of U.S. media organizations. Of these, fewer than half are, quote, accredited, end quote, by U.S. media organizations and thereby affected by the news prohibitions on the use of accredited newsmen. The remaining individuals are non-accredited freelance contributors and media representatives abroad, and thus are not affected by the new CIA prohibition. More than a dozen United States news organizations and commercial publishing houses formally provided cover for CIA agents abroad. A few of these organizations were unaware that they provided this cover. The committee notes that the new CIA prohibitions do not apply to, quote, unaccredited, end quote, Americans serving in media organizations, such as representatives of U.S. media organizations abroad or freelance writers. Of the more than 50 CIA relationships with United States journalists or employees in American media organizations, fewer than one-half will be terminated under the new CIA guidelines. The committee is concerned that the use of American journalists and media organizations for clandestine operations is a threat to the integrity of the press. All American journalists, whether accredited to a United States news organization or just a stringer, may be suspects when when any are engaged and covert activities. Footnote 39. Pausing the reading to read footnote 39. For explanation of italics, see footnote page 79. Resuming the reading. Subsection 4. Covert use of American religious personnel. The committee has found that over the years, the CIA has used very few religious personnel for operational purposes. The CIA informed the committee that only 21 such individuals have ever participated in either covert action projects or the clandestine collection of intelligence. On February 11, 1976, the CIA announced, CIA has no secret paid or contractual relationships with any American clergyman or missionary. This practice will be continued as a matter of policy. The committee welcomes this policy with the understanding that the prohibition against all, quote, paid or contractual relationships, end quote, is in fact a prohibition against any operational use of all Americans following a religious vocation. I'm going to pause the reading to make another note. A number of these subsections are in italics, but as for the text, that wasn't in italics. The last one was in that paragraph right before it cited to footnote 39. So now the text is just it's just standard with no italics, just as a note. Resuming the reading. Subsection Recommendations. In its consideration of the recommendations that follow, the committee noted the Central Intelligence Agency's concern that further restriction on the use of Americans for operational purposes will constrain. End of page 455, beginning page 456. Current operating programs. The committee recognizes that there may be at least some short-term operational losses if the committee recommendations are effected. At the same time, the committee believes that there are certain American institutions whose integrity is critical to the maintenance of a free society, which should therefore be free of any unwitting role in the clandestine service of the United States government. 42. The committee is concerned about the integrity of American academic institutions and the use of individuals affiliated with such institutions for clandestine purposes. Accordingly, the committee recommends that the CIA amend its internal directives and require that individual academics used for operational purposes by the CIA, together with the president or equivalent official of the relevant academic institutions, be informed of the clandestine CIA relationship. Footnote 41. Pausing the reading to read footnote 41. This recommendation is consistent with and would extend section 4B9 of EO, or Executive Order 11905, which states that CIA sponsorship of classified or unclassified research must be, quote, known to appropriate senior officials of the academic institutions and to senior project officials, end quote. Resuming the reading. 43. The committee further recommends that, as soon as possible, the Permanent Intelligence Oversight Committee or committees of Congress examine whether further steps are needed to ensure the integrity of American academic institutions. 44. By statute, the CIA should be prohibited from the operational use of grantees who are receiving funds through educational and or cultural programs which are sponsored by the United States government. 45. By statute, the CIA should be prohibited from subsidizing the writing or production for distribution within the United States or its territories of any book, magazine, article, publication, film, or video or audio tape unless publicly attributed to the CIA, nor should the CIA be permitted to undertake any activity to accomplish indirectly such distribution within the United States or its territories. 46. The committee supports the recently adopted CIA prohibitions against any paid or contractual relationship between the agency and U.S. and foreign journalists accredited to U.S. media or organizations. The CIA prohibitions should, however, be established in law. 47. The committee recommends that the CIA prohibitions be extended by law to include the operational use of any person who regularly contributes material to or is regularly involved, directly or indirectly, in the editing of material, or regularly acts to set policy or provide direction to the activities of U.S. media organizations. 48. The committee recommends that the agency's recent prohibition on covert paid or contractual relationship between the agency and any American clergyman or missionary should be established by law. Section I. Proprietaries and cover. Subsection 1. Proprietary organizations. CIA proprietaries are business entities wholly owned by the agency which do business, or only appear to do business, under commercial guise. They are part of the, quote, arsenal of tools, end quote, of the CIA's. End of page 446, beginning page 457. Clandestine services. They have been used for espionage as well as covert action. Most of the larger proprietaries have been used for paramilitary purposes. The committee finds that too often large proprietaries have created unwarranted risks of unfair competition with private businesses and of compromising their cover as clandestine operations. For example, Air America, which at one time had as many as 8,000 employees, ran into both difficulties. While internal CIA financial controls have been regular and systematic, the committee found a need for even greater accountability, both internally and externally. Generally, those auditing the CIA have been denied access to operational information, making management-oriented audits impossible. Instead, audits have been concerned only with financial security and integrity. The committee found that the CIA's Inspector General has on occasion been denied access to certain information regarding proprietaries. This has sometimes inhibited the ability of the Inspector General's office to serve the function for which it was established. Moreover, the General Accounting Office has not audited these operations. The lack of review by either the GAO or the CIA Inspector General's office means that, in essence, there has been no outside review of proprietaries. One of the largest current proprietaries is an insurance investment complex established in 1962 to provide pension and annuities, insurance, and escrow management for those who, for security reasons, could not receive them directly from the U.S. government. The committee determined that the Congress was not informed of the existence of this proprietary until, quote, some time, end quote, after it had been made operational and had invested heavily in the domestic stock markets, a practice the CIA has discontinued. Moreover, once this proprietary was removed from the Domestic Operations Division and placed under the General Counsel's office, it received no annual CIA project review. The record establishes that on occasion, the insurance investment complex had been used to provide operational support to various covert action projects. The Inspector General in 1970 criticized this use of the complex because it threatened to compromise the security of the complex's primary insurance objectives. In general, the committee found that when the CIA sought to dispose of or dissolve a proprietary, a considerable effort was made to avoid conflicts of interest. However, pressures were sometimes unsuccessfully brought to bear on the CIA from without, and on one or more occasions from high-level agency officials to do so by disposing of an entity in a manner that would benefit a particular party. In this connection, the committee notes that the CIA is not subject to the provisions of the Federal Disposal of Property Act, which ordinarily guards against such pressures. Management and control of proprietaries frequently required, and still do, what is termed, quote, cooperative interface, end quote, with other government agencies, such as the SEC and IRS. The committee found no evidence that these relationships involved circumventing statutory or regulatory requirements. Their purpose appears to be to enable the agency to comply with other agencies' requirements in a secure manner. However, the nature and extent of such, quote, interfacing, end quote, has not always been completely recorded in the CIA, making it difficult to ensure the propriety of such relationships. End of page 457, beginning page 458. I will end it here for this recording.